Good afternoon and welcome to the Akron Roundtable. I'm Karen Talbot, Board Chair and President of the Akron Roundtable Board of Directors. Today's program will be rebroadcast on WKSU 89.7 FM on October 1st at 8 p.m., sponsored by Layman's. This continues to be a different but effective venue for an Akron Roundtable event, and we're delighted that so many of you are able to join us today at this virtual forum. We sincerely thank PBS Western Reserve in Kent, Ohio for providing its talent and resources to make today's virtual event possible. Today it's our privilege to welcome to the Roundtable stage Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose. His topic is Making Ohio Ready for November. You can read more about this month's speaker, future Roundtable speakers, and our Akron Roundtable podcasts by going to our website, akronroundtable.org. Akron Roundtable is grateful for the generous support it receives from sponsors, patrons, and subscribers. And you too can financially support our virtual forum series by going to our website to make a contribution. Our title sponsor throughout our 2020 season is Cleveland Clinic Akron General. I'm fortunate to serve alongside an outstanding group of dedicated community leaders on the Akron Roundtable Board of Directors, a list of whom can be found on our website. Should you have any questions or suggestions regarding Akron Roundtable, please feel free to contact any member of the board. During today's event, we will be using Asker technology, which enables you to submit questions by way of mobile devices. Questions can be submitted at any time and will be forwarded for review during the Q&A portion of the program. Watch the screen for instructions should you need them. Please mark your calendars now for our October 15th virtual forum, when Akron Roundtable will host Dr. Julius Bailey, an award-winning author and educator. He's currently the Director of Pre-Law and Justice, Law and Public Policy at Wittenberg University. His latest book, Racism, Hypocrisy, and Bad Faith, A Moral Challenge to the America I Love, was released in February of this year. Now, I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose. He was born in Akron and raised in nearby Copley. He served in the Ohio Senate for 2 terms prior to being elected to his current office in the 2018 election. He's a veteran, having served in the United States Army and later the U.S. Special Forces as a Green Beret. During then, he received the Bronze Star for his service in Iraq. Secretary LaRose is a graduate of The Ohio State University, and he and his wife are the proud parents of 3 daughters. The Secretary of State has many important duties, with one being Ohio's Chief Elections Officer, which includes working to ensure that Ohio's elections are secure, accurate, and accessible. I know we're all looking forward to hearing Secretary LaRose's timely comments with our next election experience at hand. Welcome, Secretary LaRose.
Well, thank you so much, Karen, and let me say thank you to the Akron Roundtable for overcoming the current challenges we face to continue this important work of engaging in thoughtful and civil conversation. That's perhaps needed now more than ever, and I, for one, am proud that my hometown, Akron, continues this great tradition. As you said, Karen, I was born and raised here in Summit County, and this place will always be home. This is a place that I dearly love. My wife and I made a difficult but necessary decision a year ago to move down to Columbus so that I could be home from work in time to put the kids to bed. And although we've moved down to Columbus, Akron and Summit County is definitely the place that I will always consider home. And I know that today watching are so many friends and family members. In fact, when my mom saw the advertisement in the paper that I was doing the Akron Roundtable, she was very proud of that. And so I really appreciate the chance to speak with all of you today. As I said, civil discourse is important, perhaps more now than ever. It's important for us to remember that our neighbor across the street who may have another candidate's yard sign different from the one that we support is not an enemy. It's a fellow Ohioan, a fellow American, a friend, a neighbor, somebody that may have a different opinion than I have or that you have, but somebody that we should be able to still love and respect. And we should be able to have a disagreement on political issues and still treat one another with kindness and friendliness. That's the spirit that I bring to my work, and I hope that we as a nation can engage in that way and get back to that sense of being able to disagree without being disagreeable, to not always question each other's motives even when we have a deep disagreement on matters of public policy. My job for the last year and a half has been to serve as your Ohio Secretary of State. This is a job I love dearly. I ran for this office after 8 years in the state Senate because I love elections and I love the work of this office. And by the way, I love the other component of this office, which is where I serve as that front door for all new businesses that begin in Ohio. And it's an inspiration to me to see people embrace the challenges of entrepreneurship and to start and grow a business. And obviously that's not the topic that we're here to talk about today, but my role as the front door for new businesses is one that I love dearly as well. Of course, my role as Chief Elections Officer is one that's on the minds of a lot of Ohioans and a lot of Americans right now. And as we know, we are in election season. Early voting begins in just 11 days, and the polls open for Election Day in just 39 days. And a lot of people don't realize this, but for some Ohioans, their ballots are already in the mail. Now, that is for those who are overseas, serving in the military or studying abroad, working overseas. Those UACAVA ballots have already started to go out from boards of elections. And so truly, the election season in Ohio is well underway. I told you that I love this work of serving as Ohio's Chief Elections Officer, and part of it comes from my time in the military, where I had the chance in both Iraq and Kosovo to see people cast a ballot for the first time in places where they hadn't had the ability to do that before. To see the pride on the faces of Iraqi men and women as they walked out of a polling location and held a purple finger in the air, and they were so proud of that indication that they were a voter. That purple finger was sort of like the I voted sticker that Ohioans are so proud to wear on their lapel after they cast their ballot. But that purple finger was so much more than that. For these Iraqi men and women, it was actually a badge of courage. Where I was, the terrorists that we were dealing with on a nightly basis on the streets of southern Iraq had told people that it was un-Islamic to vote. Of course, there's nothing true about that. That's an utter lie. But they told people that if they saw purple ink on their finger, they would cut their fingers off. And so when Iraqi men and women walked out of a polling place and held their finger in the air, it might as well have been another finger. They were saying, you can't intimidate me. I'm not afraid of you. I'm a powerful, free man. I'm a powerful, free woman. I did something remarkable today and cast a ballot. I think that for many Americans, in some cases, voting has become so ubiquitous that we've lost that sense of wonder and awe for really how powerful of an act it is. For thousands and thousands of years that humans have lived on this planet, really the ability for men and women to choose their leaders is very rare in all of that long history. In fact, in this very country where we pride ourselves on being a strong democracy, as we know for more than half of our nation's history, much more than half, we didn't get it right. We know that for a long, long time in this nation's history, people were prevented from voting because of their skin color, and that just 100 years ago, women finally received the right to vote. In fact, we celebrate the 100th anniversary this year of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, when brave suffragists worked hard to help create that more perfect union that our founding documents speak of. That idea that this great nation of ours, which we dearly love, is never has been perfect, probably never will be perfect, although I would say America is the greatest nation on earth because each generation helps to make it a little bit more perfect. And certainly that generation of suffragists did exactly that. We celebrate that heritage today and into next year as we begin the next century of women's suffrage and work to remind a new generation why this right is so precious that people would fight for it. My love for elections was rekindled just last year when I had the chance, as part of a bipartisan delegation of Secretaries of State organized by the National Association of Secretaries of State, to travel to Alabama. We went to Birmingham and to Montgomery and to Selma. I had the chance to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge with a group of other Secretaries of State and to literally walk in the footsteps of heroes of the voting rights movement, where just over 55 years ago, right here in our own country, people had to fight and in some cases bleed for the opportunity to cast a ballot. A lot of people don't realize that the march that ended up marching from Selma to Montgomery began as a voter registration drive at the Dallas County Courthouse in Selma, Alabama. I had the chance to have lunch with a man named Bernard Lafayette, who was sent there as a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He said, "Send me where it's hardest. Send me where it's the hardest place for African Americans to register to vote." And so he went to Selma, Alabama. To get to stand there in that place where people have fought for this precious right, to me was nearly a spiritual experience. And I would encourage you all, and certainly once we get beyond this pandemic experience that we're having and are able to travel more freely again, to visit those sites, because you can still meet some of these heroes of the movement and hear their stories. And we won't be able to do that forever. That to me rekindled my love for elections and really reminded me about the importance of the work that I do and why it's so crucial. I'm proud to say that Ohio is well positioned as a leader in the nation in many regards to how we vote. And maybe sometimes as Ohioans we take this for granted because this is our home state, this is what we know. But really Ohio is well recognized around the country as a real leader in elections and in voting. Let me talk about that. First of all, just how we organize our elections. In Ohio, everything in elections is a thoroughly bipartisan enterprise. Now think about this. In a time where it feels like the folks in Washington can't agree what day of the week it is between Republicans and Democrats, at your county board of elections and 87 other boards of elections, Republicans and Democrats come to work every morning and do this job together. In fact, the staff at your board of elections is half Republican and half Democratic. And the work that they do together on behalf of all of us is crucial. Beyond the way that our elections are organized at that decentralized, county by county, bipartisan level, the fact is that Ohio also has a long track record in making voting very easy. You know, in Ohio, we have had nearly 2 decades of experience with early voting. In Ohio, we've had nearly 2 decades of experience with no-fault absentee voting, where anybody that wants to can cast a vote from the comfort of home by mail. That's not the case in every other state. In fact, in many ways, Ohio is very much at the top of the pack as it relates to early voting and absentee voting. Many other states, as a response to the pandemic, are figuring out for the first time, in the middle of a busy presidential election in 2020, many states are figuring out for the very first time, how do we make absentee voting available to all the citizens in our state? Ohio's had nearly 20 years of experience doing this. In many states, they're figuring out for the first time, how do we make early voting available for all the citizens of our state? In Ohio, we have nearly 2 decades of experience doing just that. And so Ohio is well positioned because of those 3 great choices that we have: early voting, absentee voting, and of course, in-person election day voting. With that diverse set of choices, there's something for everybody's lifestyle or comfort level. Whatever works best for you, just choose which method you prefer, make your plan, and make sure that your voice is heard. Of course, Ohio also has a track record in establishing secure and honest elections. In fact, my office made one of our first priorities when I first came into office cybersecurity surrounding our elections. Now, it's important to sort of truncate the conversation here because people need to know that the voting machines where you actually cast your ballot, the scanner that tabulates the results, those voting machines are never connected to the internet. Those voting machines actually by law are never allowed to be connected to the internet. They're tested at both the state and federal level before they're ever purchased. Before each election, every voting machine undergoes a full battery of tests called a logic and accuracy test, where technical experts from the Board of Elections, overseen by both Republicans and Democrats, runs the machines through this full battery of tests to make sure that the results are tabulating accurately and honestly. After each election, every one of those machines also undergoes a full post-election audit. And one of the reasons why we're able to do that is in Ohio, every ballot has a paper trail. Every ballot cast has a hard copy paper trail associated with that. As a result, the boards of elections can go after the election and compare the paper result to the electronic result. And by the way, it usually doesn't make news because it's kind of that dog bites man story that it's not particularly newsworthy. But weeks after the election, you will have a report issued by your Board of Elections that'll say, yes, the results were accurately tabulated. And that's important for Ohioans to know. Now, as much as those pieces of the elections infrastructure are strictly segregated and kept off of the internet and kept under double lock and key at the Board of Elections, there are components of our work in elections that by their nature have to be connected to the internet. The online voter registration system, the website where voters go to print a form or to maybe check their registration or to look up where their polling place is. Those aspects have to be connected to the internet, and so we have to secure them, and Ohio has really led the way on this. I issued a long checklist for every Board of Elections to complete, and I'm proud to say that they completed those checklists in early January in this year. Long before we were talking about a pandemic, what we were focusing on with our boards of elections is making sure that we protect our elections infrastructure. And when the U.S. Department of Homeland Security tells other states to follow Ohio's example, that tells us that we're doing something right. When I was asked to go to Israel back in January and speak at an international cybersecurity conference to highlight how Ohio is really leading the charge on the security of our elections infrastructure, that tells us that we're doing something right. And so this is another area where Ohio has truly led. And I talked about our voting equipment. Ohio has invested in our elections. In many ways, this is the envy of other states. I've had other secretaries of state come up to me and say, how did you get your state to spend $115 million to buy all new elections equipment? And the simple answer is we value this in Ohio. We value that county and state partnership on how we run elections, and that's why the state of Ohio put up a record amount of money just 2 years ago to buy new state-of-the-art and secure equipment for every county board of elections. And so as much as Ohio is in a really good position because of the work that we've done over really the last several years, including during my time in the legislature and well before that when others worked to make sure that Ohio was on a good footing, as much as Ohio is ready to go, of course, the pandemic presented new challenges to us. We jumped into this very early. In fact, immediately as soon as the primary election was done in the spring, we began what we call a Ready for November task force, where we gather elections officials from around the state. We bring in experts, health experts. We even brought in experts from Cedar Point, the amusement park, that talked to us about how to effectively manage lines, although, of course, we work to avoid lines. But if there are lines, we have to make sure that we effectively manage them. And who better than the folks that run amusement parks to advise us on that? So we have this weekly meeting called the Ready for November Task Force that's broadcast live on the Ohio channel and archived on the Ohio channel website if you're ever interested in watching some of these. They're very interesting. It's an in-depth conversation really about the nuts and bolts of how elections work. So as we have been focused on how do we deal with the challenges the pandemic faces to make sure that we're ready for November, I want to highlight a few topics. First of all, many of these are important elections administration's imperatives regardless of a pandemic. And in some ways, and I'm the optimist, many of the things that we're doing in response to making sure that we're ready to vote even amid this pandemic are going to be paying dividends well into the future to continue strengthening Ohio's position as an election leader. First of all, accurate information. Unfortunately, we live in a time where there's a lot of dubious information out there, some of it malicious and intentional, others just the sort of rumors and urban legends that make their way around, particularly this time of year as people invent conspiracy theories about elections and that kind of thing. Some of it, by the way, comes from foreign adversaries that want to try to diminish the trust that we have in elections. And obviously that's something that we can never stand for. And so being a source of accurate information, being that trusted source as your Secretary of State, and by the way, your County Board of Elections is also that trusted source of information, is vital. That's why we maintain an active and aggressive social media presence. That's why I engage in a lot of conversations like this. And really every day, yesterday, I was on the campus of the University of Akron talking with a group of student athletes and then a group of student government leaders about these very questions. That to me is really a part of my daily work to make sure that people have accurate information. And I would encourage you to be the source of accurate information yourself. One simple ask is think before you share. Not everything you see on social media deserves to be shared. When you share something, you're validating it for your friends. You're saying, this is something I'm paying attention to and you should pay attention to it too. And so do your research before you share something. And also make sure you're consuming a wide variety of information. If you're getting all of your news from one television network or one newspaper, then you're not getting the complete story. Be an informed voter. Be a source of accurate information for your friends. Also, another thing that we've been focusing on quite a bit is voter registration. You know, traditionally, Ohio has been a state with a very high percentage of voter registration. We're proud of that. Ohio has, of our eligible age population, a very large number that are registered to vote. But that's not a static situation, it's a dynamic situation, because every year Ohioans are turning 18, moving into the state, changing their addresses. And so making sure that people keep their registration up to date is a top and a very important priority for my office. Now, it's challenging in this environment to do some of the traditional voter registration drives. Walking up to someone on a college campus or at a festival with a clipboard is just not on the table this year, right? And so we've had to be creative about this. First of all, Ohio has online voter registration. By the way, a bill that I sponsored 5 years ago in the state legislature. And so anybody that wants to can use voteohio.gov as long as you have a state ID or driver's license. You go to voteohio.gov and you can get registered, check your registration or update your registration. Here's the first of several calls to action I'll have for you. Check your registration. You may have been registered for years, but maybe you've moved since the last time you updated your registration with the Board of Elections. It only takes a minute or two to go to voteohio.gov and check your registration. It's something every Ohioan should do. We've had a lot of innovative ways of doing voter registration, though, working with community partners that have a great history of this. And I'm just going to highlight a couple of those really quickly. We came up with this idea called Raise a Glass to Democracy. This one's kind of fun, where we're partnering with craft brewers all over Ohio. In fact, we're over 50 now from the Ohio Craft Brewers Association, where Ohioans that are enjoying a high-quality craft beer are going to get that beer in a can or a bottle that says "Every vote matters," and on the back, it talks about how to register to vote. And so we all know that great political conversations tend to happen in that environment at the pub or the tap room. And so why not put a reminder right there in your hand that just talking about it doesn't do the trick. You need to be a registered voter so that you can actually make your voice heard. And so Raise a Glass to Democracy has been a great initiative. We're working with barbershops and salons. This idea came to us because this is another place where people have often great political conversations and debates. And so we have been traveling all over the state. We've got posters that we're putting up. This initiative is called Stylin' for Democracy, Now Vote. And I had the chance just 2 days ago in Cleveland on the near west side to go to a barbershop called Urban Cuts Barbershop. And there's a barber named Waverly, and he has been registering people to vote in his barbershop, and he gathered other barbers to get them involved in the initiative as well. And so we're seeing beauticians and barbershops all over the state that are doing this. I was with Al in Columbus at a Cut Above the Rest barbershop. He has registered over 2,000 people to vote at his barbershop. So this is just another example of the kind of thing that we're doing. We've got a program called Grads Vote, where every high school senior now receives a voter registration form. In fact, we send them out to the high schools in the spring, over 100,000 of them last spring, and we're going to keep this up, where the high schools get that voter registration form and they can put it right there with their high school diploma when they're graduating. So these are just some of the examples, but I'd encourage you to be an evangelist for voter registration as well. You probably don't remember when you registered, but somebody encouraged you to do it. So think of an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old, a young Ohioan that you know, and encourage them to get registered to vote. Next, poll worker recruitment. It takes, think about this, 37,000 Ohioans just to open the doors of 4,000 polling locations all throughout the state. 37,000 Ohioans, and we know that a large number of those Ohioans are in that age group where they may be more concerned about the impact the virus could have on them. And so it's important that we do poll worker recruitment every year. It's even more profound this year, and I'm happy to say that it's showing results. We've launched these 5 really innovative programs with our county boards of elections to do poll worker recruitment, everything from Youth at the Booth, where we encourage 17-year-old high school seniors to sign up to be poll workers, and it's a great program that's actually bearing a lot of fruit right now as young Ohioans are excited to get involved in this opportunity. And to things like Give a Day for Democracy, where companies all over Ohio are giving their employees a day off to sign up to be poll workers. Another innovative idea is called Work a Day, Donate Your Pay, where we're seeing nonprofit groups that are encouraging their members to sign up and then donate their poll worker salary back, because poll workers are paid between $120 and maybe even over $200 depending on the county. And so it can be a nice fundraiser in a time when it's hard to have those in-person fundraisers that your favorite charity group may have normally relied on. And so Work a Day, Donate Your Pay is another way to do this. I'm happy to report that just this week, we announced that over 44,000 Ohioans have already signed up to be poll workers. I told you we need 37,000, the bare minimum. Of course, we're not going to do anything at the bare minimum. It's not who I am. It's not who we are as Ohioans. We really know that we need 55,000 Ohioans to sign up so that we have that reserve force ready. Because God forbid there's a resurgence in the virus or a large group of people that don't show up to work on Tuesday, November 3rd. We need to have that reserve force of poll workers trained and ready to go so that all of our polling locations can open. And so the work that we're doing on poll worker recruitment is absolutely making a difference. Again, over 44,000 Ohioans have already signed up. I'm happy to say that my mom and both of my little brothers, I've got two little brothers that are college students. One just recently graduated from college. One is a student at the University of Akron. And so I'm getting my own family signed up to be poll workers, and so I'd ask you to consider it as well. Again, another call to action here. Please go to voteohio.gov/defenddemocracy and sign up to be a poll worker. When you do, and it only takes a few minutes to fill out the form, your Board of Elections will call you, hopefully only a few days later. I know some of them are a little backlogged right now, but your Board of Elections will call you within a few days. They'll schedule you for a training time. They'll set these trainings usually on Saturdays or evenings. It's about 3.5 or 4 hours of training. You're paid for your training as well, and then they'll assign you to a polling location in the county where you live so that you can help your friends and neighbors have a safe and healthy and secure and honest election if they show up to vote on November 3rd. Poll worker recruitment is absolutely vital. Also, encouraging early and absentee voting. We know this, that Ohioans have these three great choices. 4 weeks of early voting, which makes us, again, by far a top state in the nation. We're one of only 6 states that has weekend, Sunday afternoon early voting. We're one of only 20 states in the nation that has weekend early voting at all. We have evening hours. And so if you like that in-person experience, you can go to your county board of elections beginning October 6th and cast your ballot for 4 weeks, which is a great opportunity to make sure that your voice is heard. But if you don't want to do that, you also have 4 weeks of absentee voting, where Ohioans of all kinds, all throughout the state, have the ability to vote from the comfort of home using our absentee vote by mail program. Ohioans are encouraged to do those two things, but if you don't do early voting or absentee voting, the polls will open at 6:30 a.m. on Election Day. They will close at 7:30 p.m. And by the way, it'll be a safe and a healthy environment, and I'll get to that more in just a minute. But we're working to encourage Ohioans to take advantage of that absentee voting. First of all, it's a great, convenient way to vote. It's a great way to be a fully informed voter. Think about this. If you vote from the comfort of home, you don't have to memorize all your choices before you go to vote. If you vote absentee, it's like you're allowed to cheat on the test. You can flip open your laptop, you can call a friend. Think about maybe just spending a half an hour filling out your ballot and researching as you go. You'll be the most informed voter possible, and you can do that all from the safety and comfort of your own home. And when it's time to return that absentee ballot, you put your postage on it and you drop it in your mailbox. The U.S. Postal Service will take it from there, and you can track your ballot when you vote absentee by going to voteohio.gov. Just like you would track a package that you order online, you can make sure that it's received by the Board of Elections. And also, Ohioans, we want you to send in your absentee ballot as soon as you can. But the good news is, as long as it's postmarked by November 2nd, it has up to 10 days to arrive at the Board of Elections. So we don't want to procrastinate. We want to request our absentee ballot right now, and we want to mail it in as soon as we get it. But if you do, if you're one of those Ohioans that waits to the last minute, we know that even though the mail is moving perhaps a little bit slower than we're accustomed to, instead of maybe 3 or 4 days, it's taking 5 or 6, you've got 10 days for that ballot to arrive at the Board of Elections as long as it's postmarked on or before November 2nd. And so voting absentee is a great way to go. And Ohioans have trusted this for a long time, both Republicans and Democrats. It's a secure process and one that you can rely on. And we're starting to see that this work that we're doing to encourage early and absentee voting is working. Ohioans have already requested, and we just announced this week, 1.8 million absentee ballots have already been requested as of this week. Now put that in scale. In the year 2016, when we had a presidential election, there were 800,000 absentee ballots requested in the entire election cycle. So here we are in mid-September, and already 1.8 million of our fellow Ohioans have requested an absentee ballot. That's good news, and that's great news. And by the way, one of the things that helps do is take the pressure off of Election Day, because again, as I said, we don't want to see crowding. We don't want to see lines, and the more Ohioans that take advantage of that early voting and absentee voting, the better, to reduce any kind of lines or crowding at the polls for Election Day. The last thing that I want to talk about as far as what we're doing to focus on getting ready for November is the health preparedness. Now, to be clear, we're taking a cue from our private sector counterparts. We've been watching what grocery stores and restaurants and retailers and offices all over Ohio have been doing, and the great creativity that they've brought to bear to make sure that they're creating a healthy environment for both their employees and their customers. That's something that we're doing as well with voting in Ohio. So to be clear, if you're comfortable going to the grocery store, you should be comfortable going to your polling location. In fact, even more so in many cases, because we've partnered with the Centers for Disease Control as well as the Ohio Department of Health to put out a 48-point checklist. I'm a big believer in checklists. And every Board of Elections is required to follow these 48 points on this checklist. And it's the kind of things that you would assume. Making hand sanitizer available at every polling location. Having a protocol for sanitizing and wiping down the voting machines and any kind of touch surfaces between voters. Of course, requiring personal protective equipment for the poll workers to wear their masks. And of course, voters are expected to wear a mask when they show up as well, because our state's under a statewide mask mandate. If you show up without a mask, one will be offered to you, and if for whatever reason you refuse the mask that we offer you, then you'll be asked if you would vote outside, which is, by the way, an accommodation that has long existed in state law, but it was intended originally for ADA populations when many buildings didn't have the accessibility that they should have. And so we're doing all of these things to make sure that there's a healthy and safe environment so that everybody can vote confidently and be confident in their health, both as poll workers and as voters. We're also mobilizing supplies to these county boards of elections. Now, when we received $12 million in federal CARES Act money, my intention was, and what we did almost immediately, was push that money right back out the doors to the county boards of elections. I'm a believer that you need to surge resources to where the action is. This comes from my time in the military. I always thought we should get the resources out to those folks like myself that are out there on the front lines doing the work. And so over 90% of our CARES Act dollars went directly out to the county boards of elections so they can buy personal protective equipment and they can buy extra mail handling equipment, hire more staff, for example, and those are all the things that they're doing with that money. We're also receiving donations. I was at a company up in Lake County just a couple weeks ago that is manufacturing masks. They're running shifts around the clock to make masks for not just Ohio, but to supply really the world. And they donated close to 500,000 masks that we're distributing to the boards of elections. Later this week, I'm going to be visiting an Ohio company, well, really an international company with a large Ohio presence that's donating massive quantities of hand sanitizer that we're pushing out to all 88 of our county boards of elections. And so if you want to know more about this, you can also go to our website, voteohio.gov, and you can read our health protocols and all the things that we're doing to make sure that every voter can be confident in a healthy and safe experience. I want to end with this. It's unfortunate that sometimes there are those out there that spread false information. There are some out there that are claiming that it's hard to vote in Ohio. It is demonstrably not hard to vote in Ohio. Ohioans know that it's easy to vote. And by the way, the numbers bear that out. There was a recent CBS News poll done in July with a large universe of Ohio registered voters that responded that it's easy to vote in Ohio. Now think about this. 96% of the respondents to this poll said that it's easy to vote. It's hard to get 96% to agree on what day of the week it is, but Ohioans know that it's easy to vote. So don't believe the hype or the rhetoric about challenging, making it hard for people to vote. In Ohio, we pride ourselves on making it easy for people to vote, and that's why we're recognized by voting rights groups and others as a leader in the nation. Now, can we do better? Always. And I'm a big fan of innovating and modernizing and improving the processes, but the laws that we have in Ohio that I am duty bound to faithfully carry out set up a good scenario for voting. And in Ohio, when the world is watching, we're going to have a fair and honest election. And here's what I wrote on the wall of my Chief of Staff's office on his dry erase board. When Ohio releases the final official results of this election, Ohioans will know and they will believe that it was an honest contest, that they can rely on the result, and that every Ohioan had the opportunity to make their voice heard in a free and fair election. That's my duty, that's my mission on your behalf, and that's exactly what we'll do. Thank you so much for putting your faith and trust in me and my team to deliver that mission for you, and I look forward to the questions that you have.
As mentioned, our speaker has generously agreed to take questions from our audience today, and the Akron Roundtable board member, David Hunter, will be our moderator for that portion of the program. And please remember that you can continue to submit questions by way of the Asker technology. David?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today and offering that comprehensive insight on voting here in the state of Ohio. I'd like to start off with this as the first question. You and your staff have had a good reputation of expanding the opportunities for Ohioans to vote and creating many pathways for them to register that vote. And I know in the middle of August that you issued a recommendation to the boards of election that raised questions that focused around the drop box issue. And it limited only one drop box per county for use, which raised some questions, certainly by people who are concerned about the pandemic and also people who maybe had to travel long distances to get to their county board of election. And I know that litigation did follow there. And last week, a Franklin County Common Pleas Court judge issued a finding and a ruling here that the state law does not permit this limitation. I know you had been quoted as saying that your hands were tied on this and you couldn't really address it further. So could you take some time to enlighten us on what sections of state law prevent this from happening in your viewpoint, and give us some insights on what inspired the appeal of that decision from Common Pleas Court in Franklin County, if you would.
Yeah, so I'm not going to go into great depth on this because there is actually two pending lawsuits on this, one in state court and one in federal court, and it's something that obviously when there's pending litigation, just something that I can't talk about a lot. I will direct you, though, to Title 3509.05 of the Ohio Revised Code. Anybody that wants to read up on this, this goes through, and by the way, my oath of office tells me that I carry out the laws of the state of Ohio. I'm an executive office holder, not a legislator. I used to be a legislator, but I don't get to make laws. I have to faithfully carry them out as they're written. And Title 3509.05 says how you return an absentee ballot to the Board of Elections. By the way, this has been in place for many years. What it says is that the elector, the voter, can mail their absentee ballot. That's the most common way. Ohioans for generations have voted absentee, put a stamp on it, and mailed it to your Board of Elections. Really, that mailbox at the end of your driveway or attached to your front porch, or that blue box down the street, is the most convenient and reliable way to return your absentee ballot, and that's what Ohioans should do. And by the way, you can then verify that it's been received by tracking it at voteohio.gov. If you don't want to do that, what the law also allows you to do is to deliver it to the director of the Board of Elections. And that's exactly what it says in the code. If you can't do that, then you can have a family member, and it goes on to define who amounts to being a family member. It's pretty broad. Basically, any family member can return your ballot to the Board of Elections. Those are the only ways that you can return a ballot to the Board of Elections, and it says actually at the end of that section, you know, by no other means. And so I've got to carry out the law of the state of Ohio. What Ohioans should do is make a plan. Voting absentee is a great way to go, and really the best way to return your ballot is to put it in the mail, just as Ohioans have done for generations, and make sure that the Board of Elections received it by going and tracking it on our website.
One follow-up on that, if I could. If it's ultimately determined either by final judicial order that cannot be further appealed and is final, or by legislation that would augment the site that you provided, would you welcome the opportunity to have additional drop boxes in counties where it was deemed to be helpful?
Yeah, we'll follow the orders of the court for sure, especially as the process plays itself out. When there's a final ruling on this, when things have worked their way through appeals and that kind of thing, we'll carry out faithfully what the court's order or what the legislature does if they were to step in and create a new scenario as it relates to this. But let's also remember that early voting begins in just 11 days. That overseas military ballots and overseas civilian and military ballots are already being mailed out, and so perhaps in this late hour is not really the time for making big changes. You don't want to rebuild the aircraft in flight. We have a reliable and very trustworthy and time-honored system of how we run elections in Ohio. Those three choices give Ohioans a diverse array of options. It's important for Ohioans to just choose one of those and make sure that they make their voice heard. And it truly is easy to vote. And really, today, as we stand here, it's easier to vote than it's ever been in our state's history. Every county board of elections has for the first time ever in a general election, a secure 24-hour drop box. That's new. In just a handful, a small number of counties, they had those previously, but now, as a result of a directive I put out, every county board of elections is required to have those. And so that just creates another opportunity. If you work the third shift and you want to stop by the Board of Elections after they're closed, you can drop off your ballot or your ballot request, or for that matter, your voter registration form in that secure 24/7 drop box. Every county board of elections has them. The best way to go is to just mail your ballot back to the Board of Elections, but you've got other options as well.
Consistent with your approach to try and make voting easy for voters here in the state of Ohio, I know you recently sought consent from the Ohio Controlling Board to use $3 million out of your own budget to provide that prepaid postage would be sent back to voters with their absentee ballots, thereby making it even easier for them to vote and make sure that it gets back and their vote gets counted. That request came before a board of 6 people on the Ohio Controlling Board, 4 Republicans and 2 Democrats. The 2 Democrats voted in favor of that, and the 4 Republicans, and you are a Republican, sort of disagreed with you and voted against that. So my question is, how much of a disappointment was that for you? How much are you influenced by your Republican colleagues, and how is your relationship with the leaders of your party?
Yeah, thank you. So as it relates to postage paid for absentee ballot returns, this has been something that I've been pushing really since we began this whole pandemic experience back in March. When the state legislature laid out how they wanted us to conclude the March 17th primary, at that time, they authorized or really directed every county board of elections to provide postage paid envelopes, and I said that's a good idea back then. When the primary was over in late April, and I started laying out my plan for how the legislature rather should help us make sure that we're ready for November, one of the things that I proposed way back in May was that we provide postage paid for absentee ballot returns back then. I asked that we use the Federal CARES Act money for that back then, and they weren't interested in doing that. And so I tried a last attempt just recently, as you mentioned, to find money in my own budget, my own office budget, about $3 million to make sure that we could provide that postage paid. But I needed the spending authority from the state legislature to do it. Again, civics lesson kind of stuff. I can't, as an executive office holder, just spend money off budget. I have to get that either budgeted from the state legislature in the state budget or through the controlling board. I need their permission to spend large sums of money like that. I was disappointed that they said no. Because again, this is not something that really benefits Republicans or Democrats. There's no appreciable political benefit to either side on this. It just benefits voters, right? It makes it more convenient. I was talking with a voter recently, and I was just kind of trying to pick their brain about this, and I said, if we provided a postage paid envelope, how would that impact things? And she said, well, I would mail my ballot back in right away. I would vote it, I would make my choices, I'd sign it, I'd put down the identification information, I'd seal it, and I'd put it right back in my mailbox probably that same night. I said, now what if we didn't provide a postage paid envelope? She said, well, it would probably sit on the dashboard of my car for a couple days because I'd have to figure out how many stamps does it require, have to, either find a stamp in my kitchen drawer somewhere or maybe borrow one from a neighbor, and then I would send it back in, but there would be a few days delay. And so really, one of the best benefits of providing postage paid is it helps us get ballots back sooner, right? So we've been talking about flattening the curve for a long time as it relates to the virus. Yeah. Well, there's another curve that we need to flatten, and that is as it relates to absentee ballot requests. Now think about it. If everybody requested their absentee ballot at the end of October, you would overwhelm the ability of the Board of Elections to process all of those. If we all procrastinated, it would be an avalanche at the Board of Elections, and thankfully that's not happening. As I said, we've already got over 1.8 million requests in. And so what we wanted to do with postage paid was not only make it more convenient for voters, but to make it quicker for the boards of elections to get those absentee ballots back. Now, was I disappointed? Yeah. I issued a statement that said this was a missed opportunity by the legislature. I wish they had listened to me. And not just me, by the way, our bipartisan county elections officials. These are the hundreds of men and women, Republicans and Democrats. And again, everything is straight down the middle, half Republican and half Democratic. The elections officials throughout the state, we're calling on the legislature to do this as well. I think that they made a bad decision by ignoring the advice of the professional elections officials and my advice and not doing that. But again, I'm not going to get fixated on that. It's not ideal, but it's also not a deal breaker, right? Because Ohioans for a long time have known that when you return your absentee ballot, you put your stamp on it and you mail it in. That 55 cents, and it's usually 55 cents. It's usually one first-class stamp, although in some counties where you have maybe a longer ballot, if there's more questions or local levies or whatever else, it gets to longer pages and maybe it requires additional postage. But I really don't think it's the 55 cents that's standing in somebody's way. I recognize that that's more money to some than it is to others, but it's just the convenience of finding a stamp, putting it on, mailing it in, and that's why we wanted to provide the postage paid envelopes. As it relates to my role as a member of the Republican Party, listen, each of us in our political lives tend to affiliate with one party or the other. I chose the Republican Party because my beliefs more often line up with theirs, and I love the things that my party stands for, but it also is not where I get my marching orders. I do what I think is right, and as Ohio's chief elections officer, when I took this oath of office, I put on the referee's jersey. I don't wear a red jersey. I don't wear a blue jersey. I wear the stripes. I do the job of running elections and don't take into account what benefits one party or the other. That would be inappropriate. And by the way, this work is so much bigger than politics. So much bigger than politics. Think about it. The only legitimacy any elected official has, from President of the United States down to local township trustee, the only legitimacy you have comes from the consent of the governed. And the only way we establish consent of the governed in a democracy is through free and fair elections. So this is the very foundation of our way of life. This is so much bigger than party. I would never do anything in this job because of a partisan consideration. And do I get along well with the leaders of my party? I absolutely do.
That's good.
Yeah.
In that regard, I have another question that's going to be tough to ask here, but you'll have your referee stripes on and you may have to blow a whistle and throw a yellow flag on this. This is one from one of our viewers who's sent their question in via Ask Her Technology, and here it is. The president has made it clear that he will challenge election results if he doesn't win. Will you commit to defending Ohio's voting by mail if the results are questioned?
I'll commit to defending every part of the lawful exercise of elections in the state of Ohio. And this is one of the reasons why our team has committed to a really unprecedented level of transparency. Everything's an open book, and we're very big on making sure that people have the facts and the information. And one of the things that we've done is change the way even our election night reporting website works, right? Because we all know that on election night, you get the unofficial result. Now again, here's another opportunity for a civics lesson. For so many years, that unofficial result has been conclusive, right? You've just been able to look at it and say, okay, well, we can tell who's gonna win or who's gonna lose. Not just for the presidential race, but all the way down. But it's never the final tally because, as I said, Ohio Board of Elections can continue receiving ballots for 10 days. And whether it's one of my former military teammates serving overseas or whether it's an Ohioan that just procrastinated, those ballots, as long as they're legally cast, deserve to be counted, and they will continue to arrive on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, up to 10 days after the election. And so when we report that unofficial result, we're also going to report now the number of outstanding absentee ballots. That's a crucial number to know because think about the very basic math of this is if there's one candidate, let's talk about the presidential race, for example. If there's one candidate that's ahead by 1 million votes, and there's only 200,000 outstanding ballots, well, then numerically you can say, hey, this contest is over. But if there's a candidate that's only ahead by 150,000 votes, and there's 200,000 outstanding absentee ballots, well, then by definition it's too close to call. And so we are going to report as quickly as we can on election night. We'll never sacrifice the accuracy for speed, but we'll report as quickly as we can on election night how many votes have been received up to that point. But we're also going to let people know how many outstanding absentee ballots there are. And it'll be a higher number than usual because many Ohioans are relying on voting by mail. But to be clear, democracy to me is it's like a religion. It's a faith. It's something you believe in. Whether you like the result or not, you believe in the power of free people to express their will through an accessible election. And we'll carry out the laws of the state of Ohio and make sure that Ohioans can be confident in the vote. Will different parties file lawsuits after elections? Perhaps so, and those will play themselves out. But what I will always stand for is the fact that we carry out the laws as they're written in Ohio, and everyone has an opportunity to make their voice heard, and it's done fully transparently.
Well, I know you're an Eagle Scout, so one of their motto is "Be prepared," if I'm not mistaken. So the race in Ohio at the top of the ballot is very close, and I know that having done my research on this, that mailed-in ballots that are postmarked the day before the election on November 2nd, you have until the 13th of November, I believe is correct, to receive those, satisfy yourself to the legitimacy of those ballots and count them. If the race in Ohio is close, won't that mean that getting a final result on how Ohioans vote may be extended 10 days?
Well, it's actually longer than that, because what the law lays out is only 2 times that you can report results, right? The law in Ohio says that we can report the unofficial canvass on election night, and then the only other time that we can report results is when we certify the final result of the election. So that's not just 10 days. There's 10 days for the ballots to arrive, but then the boards of elections need time to resolve provisional ballots, to go through whatever challenges may come up. And so really it's several weeks after the election before we certify the final results. And this is why it's important that we be fully transparent about things like, for example, if there's a large number of outstanding absentee ballots, people need to know what that number is. We will be prepared. You mentioned the Boy Scouts, and I think my staff is probably snickering right now, because every time somebody comes up short on something, I always ask them, what's the Boy Scout motto? And they say, it's be prepared. And so this is something that I live by. By the way, I'm doing an event tonight with the local Boy Scout Council, because I believe in youth mentorship, and I love going out to Camp Manitowoc every year and teaching citizenship merit badge. So being prepared is something that we are very much focused on in this office.
And I know you're being prepared on poll workers, anticipating, as we would expect you to do, that there's going to be a lot more work for them to perform, and there's different requirements there. PPE might be required, and I know that having done my research on this, that you thought maybe the bare minimum would be 37,000 poll workers. And I know that early this morning I heard on the radio that Cuyahoga County is still, just that county, is about 1,000 short of where they need to be. Can you give us an update on where you are in poll workers? Yeah. And are you going to get to that 50,000 target that you'd hope to reach? Yeah,
so we're trying to get to 55,000. What we've told the boards of elections is that they have to recruit 50% extra. And so just to use round numbers, if your county normally would have 1,000 poll workers, then you really need to recruit 1,500 this year. That's so that you can have them trained and ready to go, have that ready reserve force in case there are people that don't show up to work on Tuesday morning, November 3rd, to open the polling locations at close to 4,000 polling locations around the state. Again, because I'm a big believer in transparency and just putting all the information out there, we created a tracker. This is something else where we've gotten attention around the country. We were the first state to do this, and others are now following suit. You can go on our website, voteohio.gov or ohiosos.gov, and you can find county by county breakdown of how your county's doing, how many Democratic poll workers, how many Republican poll workers, how many they still need. And again, that's maybe a little uncomfortable for the counties that are behind, but maybe they need to be pushed a little bit to get to the number that they're looking to get to. I have every confidence that we'll get there, because Ohioans are stepping up to answer the call. It's just like when there's a natural disaster or something else that occurs, people want to donate or give blood or whatever else. This is that same kind of call to duty, signing up to be a poll worker, to make sure that we can have a fair election, as we have for 217 years of Ohio's history. To make sure that we can have a fair election is a top priority, and Ohioans are answering the call, young and old, and that's something I'm really proud to see.
We have many good questions coming in here, and the volume suggests we've got good attendance here on our virtual presentation. Here's one. If you don't mail an absentee ballot by deadline, are you precluded from voting in the November election?
So no, if you don't mail your absentee ballot request in, then you can take advantage of early voting, and you can take advantage of in-person voting. So there's 2 other choices, right? Of course, you've got a whole month of early voting, and then you've got election day voting, where the polls will open at 6:30 a.m. and close at 7:30 p.m. You have to be registered to vote, and the deadline for that is coming up October 5th. And so if you're not registered to vote, or if you think you're registered to vote and you need to make sure you are, go to voteohio.gov and make sure you're registered. And as long as you do, then you have, again, early voting, absentee voting, or in-person election day voting, all will be available. And you mentioned a lot of questions. I'd always welcome the conversation to continue on social media. If people want to follow me, it's just my name, at Frank LaRose, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So look forward to continuing the conversation that way as well.
I know you have a little anecdote on this, but earlier this year, the entertainer Kanye West walked into your office, or his representatives, with nearly 15,000 signatures on his petition to be included in the presidential election on the ballot. It was ultimately rejected by the Ohio Supreme Court as not complying with state law. You know, what was the defect in his petition? And are you going to use this as a foundation to maybe write an interesting book about this experience?
I tell you what, the experience of serving as Ohio's Chief Elections Officer has been and continues to be an interesting one, and one that I really love, actually. But the fact is, if you want to run for president, you got to fill out your paperwork correctly. I mean, that's just the most basic first step in running for president. Ohio law is very strict about how that form has to be filled out. And that was all laid out in our court case. There was a signature that didn't appear to match for his vice presidential running mate, and the paperwork was not correctly filled out. And so it was very clear to us that that request, that petition, had to be rejected. It would just, there was no way we could have accepted it.
I know in the introduction, Karen Talbot gave an extensive review of your credentials here. I know you're a Northeast Ohio native. Went to Copley in Ohio State. You're 41 years old. You served 2 terms in the Ohio legislature in the House, and now you're serving as our Secretary of State. Your term runs until, let's see, it would be 2023.
22.
22, but you're in office then, I guess,
correct,
until people are sworn in. So I want to ask you a question about what your future political aspirations might be. Are you inclined to maybe run again for Secretary of State? Do you see an opportunity to make a contribution at a higher office? Yeah. What are your plans going forward?
I think too many people in my current line of work are fixated on the next thing and not the current thing. You've got to do the job you have well, and that's been my focus and what I've poured myself into, and will continue to be. And that's just the honest to God answer. That said, I do plan on running for re-election in 2022. In fact, did a political event here in Akron last night where friends and neighbors gathered to support my re-election effort, and that's something that I deeply appreciate, that kind of hometown support. I will say that since I was 18, when I enlisted in the Army, I've found ways to serve, not always the most lucrative ways to earn a living, but ways that I can give back. And I've followed my heart in that sense, and I'll probably continue to do that. But if I don't do a good job with this thing that I'm in charge of right now, well then, everything else is off the table. So I'm going to focus on that for now.
We appreciate you being here and answering these questions. You've given us a good tutorial on how we as Ohioans can vote. So it's only fair that we ask you, how are you going to vote in this election?
So Lauren and I, we sent in our absentee ballot request as soon as we received it. My office sent out 7.8 million absentee ballot requests, so every registered voter in the state received one. By the way, just to give you a scale of that, I went out to the print shop where they were doing it. That's 17 tractor trailer loads full of mail that were going out to mailboxes all over Ohio. So we returned our form as soon as we got it. And the cool thing was I also signed up on the Franklin County Board of Elections website to be notified. So I got a text message from them that said, all right, we got your request. And so Lauren and I, once October 6th comes and the boards can start sending out their ballots, we anticipate that probably around the 7th, 8th, 9th of October, we'll receive our ballot, and we're going to vote absentee from the comfort of home. And that's something I'd encourage Ohioans to do as well.
Secretary LaRose, thank you so much for being with us today. And on behalf of the Akron Roundtable, it's my pleasure to present to you a contemplative sun as a memento of your time with us this afternoon. This celebratory work of art was designed exclusively for the Akron Roundtable by local artist Don Drum.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. And having a Don Drum piece in my office will mean the world to me as a lifelong Akron boy, so thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Have an enjoyable and safe day.